of the land that we currently inhabit. I would also like to thank the Clean Energy for All table for letting us borrow their beautiful land acknowledgement. Prior to beginning our panel, it is our practice to issue an acknowledgement that the land which the state of Florida occupies is the rightful indigenous land of the native peoples of America, the Seminole, the Miccosukee, the Creek, the Ais, the Appalachee, the Yamasee, Timucua, Tequesta, and the tribe we call Calusa. This land is theirs, it is sacred, and it is the duty of every person who occupies this place to respect it and seek to redress the foundational injustice which established this polity. I would like to further acknowledge that the state of Florida, which we seek to transform these policies, has been built in a large part on the coerced and unrewarded labor of people of color, enslaved Africans, their descendants, and migrants from Latin America and the Caribbean. The alienation of these native peoples from their land and the people of color from the fruits of their labor is not a historical tragedy, but an ongoing injustice which we must all seek to address. The climate crisis and the impacts it will have on the indigenous peoples, Black people, and people of color is merely another manifestation of these ongoing injustices. As we conduct our business here today, I implore the participants and the attendees to place the necessity of restorative justice at the forefront of their minds. And I will pass it to Jeanette and our panelists.
Thank you so much, Jillian. Welcome, everyone. We are at day 4 and the last day of the first annual Climate Justice Summit, and I'm very excited to be moderating this panel today. I think that we've had really great discussions this entire week. We started off with food sovereignty. We talked about just transition, and yet last night we talked with Joanne and Naomi, and we had a really great discussion about just recovery. So I want to invite the panelists to turn on their cameras. And tonight's topic is energy democracy. So I thought I would start us off with a working definition of what is energy democracy. You should have received an email with a link to a booklet that we put together for this summit, and it contains more information on every single topic that we discuss here. And we invite you to read it, to really research and explore these topics and find individuals, community members, and organizations that are working in these fields and see how you can get involved. You'll hear from some of them tonight, and I'm sure you'll be inspired by their stories and a lot of the work that they've been doing. So I wanted to kick us off by having everyone introduce themselves and just tell us how you came to this energy democracy work. So I'm going to, since we have a large panel, I'm going to pick and choose. So I'm going to start off with Gerie Crawford.
Hello, good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you for extending this opportunity to allow us an opportunity to participate in this panel discussion on this important issue affecting a lot of communities. I myself initially became involved with environmental justice and a new phrase that I've learned, environmental democracy, when I began seeing signs being placed up in my neighborhood, specifically directly across the street from my house, about something that was changing, and I had no knowledge of it. So I made contact with our county government and found out basically that my neighborhood was being threatened by an application for a special exception permit to approve a 650-acre solar array directly across the street from my house. Moreover, our entire community had no knowledge of this proposal, even though it had been in the planning phases for like 2 or 3 years, and we knew nothing until May of 2020. And I was concerned because I felt that I myself, as well as my family and other neighbors, had a right to know what was going on and how any changes was going to affect our neighborhood. So we felt that we should have had a right to have a voice, because this was a huge swath of property right in the middle of a historical African American neighborhood. We're talking about an area that's the size of Central Park, right in the middle of your neighborhood. So that kind of like piqued our interest, like what's going on here, because my family, as well as many other families in this neighborhood, have owned property in our area dating back to the Civil War. Many of our ancestors, as was so eloquently stated in the introduction, were brought here as property and as slaves. And our families are still here. We've persevered, and our families are still here. We're one of the few African American communities of its kind remaining in North Central Florida. So initially, Connie, Michelle, and myself began this little grassroots operation to kind of figure out what was going on and what was going to change, and how did it impact us, and what the impact would be on our neighborhood. And essentially, we got our neighborhood involved because this wasn't something that, they were aware of. We are a small community in Southwest Alachua County, farming, rural community. We have a lot of elderly people, and they didn't know what was going on. And we felt that something was that they should have had a voice as well. So like I said, we partnered together with other residents. We formed our community council to address our concerns. We wanted to be known that we support solar and all other renewable energy sources. However, we felt that what was happening was not fair, nor was it equitable. And there wasn't any meaningful community engagement that we were a part of. So our neighbors formed a coalition, and we felt that we had to address the process as citizens and have our voices be heard. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to my neighbor, Michelle.
Thank you, everybody. Michelle Rutledge, my home's in Archer, Florida, and I'm a member of the St. Peter, St. Paul Community Council. Thank you.
Connie, would you like to hop on and introduce yourself?
Did you say Connie? Hello, everyone. I'm Connie Lee. I'm also a member of the St. Peter, St. Paul Community Council. And that tells our story from 2020. So I will just leave it at that, how we became involved in energy democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Nykeeba?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much again for the opportunity to be here. I'm Nykeeba Brown, and for the past 4 years, I've been studying in detail what the world would look like through the scope of transitioning our garbage into energy, particularly in the global south. So how this ties into energy democracy is is in the idea and the sense of decentralizing. So how I came up with this whole idea. I'm currently in Jamaica. I live in Jamaica. I was raised in Jamaica accent. And so in Kingston here, every year we have this huge fire that is like detrimental to like the air quality, from this public dumping area called Riverton City. And so when I was in law school, I started to really think about, or I was exposed to the concept of waste to energy. And I started to really think about, what if we decentralize from the current Jamaica public service, which monopolizes energy in the country and leaves many people with energy poverty, to their detriment to their health in many other ways. And what if we converted Riverton City into an energy center? And what if it could be more focused? What if it could be community driven? And so that is my introduction to energy democracy. I further explored what that would look like in Africa. I studied international environmental law with a focus in Nigeria, because Nigeria is interestingly riddled with energy poverty, even though it's one of the biggest petroleum and oil providers in the world. Nigeria's economy is the biggest in Africa currently, faltering a bit, but pretty much the biggest economy in Africa, and that's based on the oil and gas industry. And yet there is this influx, or not this influx, there is an abundance of, again, pollution, which is resulting in detrimental health issues, and a centralized energy company that is leaving many people energy poor, again, to their detriment, again, health-wise, educationally, and just basically subsisting on primitive sources of energy. So that is how I have been integrated in this, and I'm really grateful for being a part of the conversation.
Thank you. And now we have from Kelly.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor to be with all of you. So my name is Kelly Lynch. I live in Boston, Massachusetts, which is the occupied territory of the Massachusetts and Wampanoag peoples. I am a consultant in climate justice policy and clean energy organizing. And this fall, I will begin a Master's of Divinity at Boston University School of Theology with a focus in Buddhism and Christianity. My background for over 20 years has been in community organizing, advocacy, and clean energy business. And a few years ago, I was introduced to the concept of energy democracy in the movement through a book by Denise Fairchild and Al Weinreb called Energy Democracy, Advancing Equity and Clean Energy Solutions. And in the book, they pose energy democracy as a response to the intersecting crises of climate change, systemic racism, and an extractive economy. They pose energy democracy as a common operating frame that binds together a diversity of movements. They say that the global fight to save the planet, to conserve and restore our natural resources, to be life-sustaining, must fully engage community residents and must change the larger economy to be sustainable, democratic, and just. And in my years of organizing on climate change, I've learned that we cannot separate environmental goals from social, racial, and economic justice. When we do that, the effects set us back time and time again. Back in 2008, I was lucky to be part of the early founding years of Green for All, a national nonprofit organization that was co-founded by Van Jones and Medora Carter. The mission of Green for All is to build an inclusive green economy strong enough to lift millions of people out of poverty. Our focus was on connecting the growing economy to practitioners and innovators in communities of color. But our challenge was all too often environmentalists who didn't prioritize inclusion, equity, and democracy. Our founder, Van Jones, would tell us the story of a California environmental advocates coalition that were pushing for an oil extraction tax in 2006. They spent tons of money and time on a campaign only to be squashed by the oil industry at the last minute when they spent enormous sums of money on a misinformation campaign that targeted people of color. Without significant relationships within communities of color, environmentalists were sitting ducks and the oil tax failed. At Green for All, I learned what has become a guiding principle for my life. Our work is not only about what we do, it's about who we be. Energy democracy is a framework for making decisions around energy that are conscious of the systems of harm beneath our feet. When we combine social justice, economic justice, and democratic values with environmental protection, we can tackle climate change at its root cause and begin to truly heal our environment. Right now, I'm working with Miami Climate Alliance to apply principles of energy democracy and environmental justice to the task of creating a shared accountability task force and accountability framework for Miami-Dade County. We envision shared accountability between government, and frontline communities that helps everyone know the score along the pathway to a truly equitable transition to clean energy and climate justice. So this is what energy democracy means to me.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And I realized that I said I was going to say what energy democracy was, and I failed to mention, I failed to read the definition. So I'm glad you threw it in there, but I also put it in the chat. And I didn't formally introduce myself. My name is Jeanette Ruiz. I am the Program and Communications Manager for the Miami Climate Alliance. And the reason why I feel this panel is important to me personally is because of the work that we do at the Miami Climate Alliance on a daily basis. And in everyone's response, I think we use the word community. I think everyone used the word community. I heard it over and over again, because one thing that's lacking, and I've noticed in most plans, are community. It's like, how often is there engagement with the people who are going to be affected by the policies, or the people who are going to be affected by these solar companies coming in to your community? It's the community. So when we talk about energy democracy, we're talking about the right of people to make decisions for themselves and for their land and for their communities. So I wanted to do a kind of like a round robin, if you will, on why do we have to have these conversations? Why does energy democracy matter? And I'm going to start with Nykeeba.
Absolutely. So what stands out to me about the electrification of the world is that how from industrialization up until now, there's always been like an abject negligence towards communities that are at risk, right? So communities of color, poor communities, they've always been marginalized. And I think energy democracy is important to kind of resist that model and to kind of reclaim and to insist that that it be a community-based model. It's actually something that we can come together. We have a say. We're stakeholders. We're the biggest stakeholders, and traditionally we've been left out, essentially. And so it's so interesting. I loved what you just brought out, Jeanette, as well as what you said, Kelly. Typically, you know, will people traditionally have looked at climate change through the same scope of capitalism as it currently is, right? So you have these like big companies and everything is centralized. And so you still have marginalized communities being left with the short end of the stick. And I think it's very important. I think the reason that this conversation is so important is because there needs to be an awareness of that, and that there needs to be a change and a demand through education and through knowledge and through just getting as much information as possible and learning how to empower ourselves as communities. I think it's extremely important for us to have these conversations so that we can mobilize and ensure that, you know, yeah, we're doing climate change, we're exploring climate change and we're combating it, but it's going to be done in an equitable way. And so that, which is basically the how I've been trying to approach this idea and this model of turning garbage into energy. It cannot just be, it's not something where I see, for instance, again, I gave the example in Jamaica, it's not something that can be run by Jamaica Public Service, because they're going to continue to exploit us. You know, they'll still generate the energy, but they will continue to charge these insane prices and still not be held accountable. And one of the biggest things in energy democracy is really accountability, which is why we value it back to the community. So that's why I think that these conversations like these are extremely important.
I'm going to bring in Michelle into the conversation. You know, yesterday's panel, one of the things that was brought up was defining equity, right? And it's like having the conversation starting there so that everyone is on the same page in that respect, right? So Michelle, why do you think these conversations are important?
I definitely think talking about energy democracy is important because it's still relevant, like you mentioned. This week, we probably all seen the specials for the 100th anniversary for the Tulsa massacre of the Greenwood neighborhood that happened in 1921. And that has been with me because some of the same issues that they experienced 100 years ago are the issues that Black communities and other marginalized communities we are experiencing today. So redlining, policing, environmental racism, policies that create and perpetuate inequities. All of these cumulative effects or impacts add up and affect minority communities and frontline communities' ability to accumulate wealth and in our health. And so when you ask why it's important to help us all understand each other and learn the different perspectives to see how we can do things differently. And so that's at least when I was thinking about that question, why is it important? It's important to talk. And then more importantly than talking, it's important to begin acting differently and acting in ways that we can address some of these inequities. So thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Gerie or Connie, would you like to hop in here?
I just want to add that I think Michelle did a very good job at describing why we still need this conversation. But I just want to add that the recent increase in pre-exempted bills is a good indication, a good reason why we need to still have this conversation. And to add on to Michelle, about racism is real. And also the conversation should address corporate greed and its effect on climate change. So the conversation, like Michelle said, is very timely and still exists. Thank you.
Hello, this is Gerie, and I would just like to include something that discusses since Michelle mentioned Tulsa and, like families here in Archer are descendants of the Rosewood Massacre. So the same thing happened here right in our backyard. But the trauma that it leaves with families over generations. And when you, as Michelle had said, when your families or your, can acquire wealth as they did, let's say in Tulsa, and it is stripped away from you because of the massacre, and then you redline the neighborhood and build a highway through the middle of the existing neighborhood to ensure that those neighborhoods never came back as they once were. So that's why these conversations are important, even though, as she stated, and many of the others here, that this is something that's generational. At some point, it has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed out loud, so that we can affect change. Because if we don't, there will continue to be these types of traumas, these types of incidents, these types of situations where we find marginalized and disenfranchised communities being overrun time and time again. And then, the subsets of all of that are the health issues and the economic issues. And that it's like a domino effect. And somebody has to stop and realize this is the outcome of these poor decisions, poor policy decisions.
Yeah, and I'll just add in, so when we talk about energy democracy, it's important because I think it's important to realize the historical impacts and insults to a community, so that as we transition into renewables, it's a just transition. And so that's why it's important to understand, for example, our community in Archer. And one more mention about Tulsa. There's a street in the Greenwood neighborhood named Archer Street. And that really stuck with me because I'm like, wow, like we're standing on what they accomplished in Tulsa and the Greenwood neighborhood. And we're also still experiencing what they experienced in Greenwood. But to have a just transition, as you say, is to talk about what has happened previously and what can we do differently, so that we can correct and so we can make some of these inequities better for those, for I say those, but for our communities, such as frontline communities like Archer. So thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Kelly, I want to invite you into this conversation as well in terms of why are these conversations important?
Yeah, I'm so glad each of you mentioned the history of systemic racism when it relates to energy as well as corporate greed. That, you know, a lot of people, I've like I said before, I've been in the climate and environmental movement for about 20 years, and a lot of people don't really understand the depth of change that we need to create, need to see in this country and around the world. And one of the beautiful things about energy democracy is it really ties together what we need to change with how deeply flawed our history has been and our systems have become. You know, mass pollution arose from the invention of combustion-dependent machines during the Industrial Revolution. And of course, the Industrial Revolution started with white colonialists whose values discarded humanity in order to compete in trade and profit. And so we had violent imperialism, the genocide of indigenous peoples, the kidnapping of millions of Africans in chattel slavery, subsequent and continued destruction of lives, land, and culture that all built this fossil fuel economy that we live in, right? And so we can't just say, oh, it's simple, we just need solar panels. It's not enough. And too many people in the climate movement and the environmental movement think that social justice and equity do not belong in the environmental conversation. And the fact is that is completely wrong. And that is taking us further into this trap of climate change that you're so concerned about. So that's why we need to start talking about energy democracy and really listening to the leaders of color that have been speaking for years and years and years about how to address environmental issues through justice. Environmental justice movement is more than 30 years old.
Nykeeba, did you want to say something or did you just move your hand? Okay.
I just moved my hand, but I completely agree with what everyone has been saying. Absolutely.
We do have a question in the chat. Let me see here. So why is community engagement continuously undermined by political officials and big money? How do we raise up a movement to empower people?
Jeanette, can you let me speak on that, please?
Go for it.
I think, especially after my experience with the pre-exemptive bills in Florida legislation this past season, I believe to get to the root of the problem, we need to change campaign finance laws. I think that's the root of the problem. Corporations have too much influence over politicians. We need to take the power from the corporations and give the power to citizens to effect change. I think that's the root of the problem. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to weigh in on the question?
This is Michelle. I agree. I definitely agree with what Connie said. I think as far as communities, I think just speaking, just going, if it just starts with the local government and then you work your way up to your state legislator. Prior to last year, I voted, but I really had not had much engagement with the whole local government process. And then because of this was a catalyst. As Gerie mentioned, we learned of an industrial project that was proposed in the middle of our community because of that, that was a catalyst to use my voice. And so I think what would be encouraging is to know that there is power with people, and that if we communicate that and share that and come together and collaborate, I think we're more powerful than we think. No, we can't, we may not have the money of big business. And I do feel like there needs to be some changes in how the, who has the ear possibly of some of our lawmakers. And I feel that if it's known that we care, we meaning the community cares, and are have solutions if they're listened to, I think that might also be a pathway alongside changing some of the rules with our legislators. Thank you.
Hello, Jeanette. This is Gerie. I would like to add, you've heard that phrase that's been coined that, politics are local, all politics begin locally. And we found, of course, that to be true in our situation. As Michelle had said, we decided as a community of people in our neighborhood to address not the solar company, because we decided they would put those things on a postage stamp as long as they got paid for it. Our issue was with our local government changing or, addressing them and using what was in place, the county's comp plan, what was going on with our environmental studies, the Floridian aquifer here in the state of Florida, the water and all of these things. We use those tools as a community to say, this is what's going to be affected if you make this decision. And this is what's going to happen, and then requesting that they provide us information on, 30 years from now, how is this going to look? Because people who are making these decisions today won't be here in 30 years. And this is going to affect our property and our generational wealth moving forward. Yes, and we have these special interest groups, and you have lobbyists that are paying big money, but we were able to successfully engage our local government, and they heard our voice. Had we not done that, had we not just saw the signs going up and say, hey, something's going on over there, I wonder what's happening, I would be looking across from my house and seeing a danger high voltage sign right now. So your voices, grassroots, it does work. It does work when you start with you could start with a war of one person, and it can, snowball into something that could be effective. But a lot of communities don't know that. A lot of people don't know that. We learned through this process, a lot of folks in our community didn't know, hey, I can call up the county commissioner and I can talk to them. Yes, you can. And you can say what you feel, and, they will listen. They may not change, but at least they had a voice, and you feel empowered when someone hears what you have to say about an issue.
I'd just like to add to what Gerie is saying. I completely agree. I think many people are unaware of how they can use the law in their favor. One of the things I remember studying while doing my Master's of Laws is that there's a land use process, right? There's an environmental land use dispute process that you're able to go through, and there are lawsuits, and it can be done amicably outside of litigation. And if you have to litigate, you have the power to litigate, and unfortunately people are unaware that they have these rights. So to answer the person's questions, that's one of the reasons why, as usual, like big entities and large institutions will always take advantage of what they perceive as people's ignorance. They don't know they can sue us. They don't know they can bring us in court and force us to actually sit through the process that's supposed to come into play when we have these big zoning decisions to be made. You're not supposed to, as a company, just walk in on a community where people are there or that people own property and just make those decisions. There's supposed to be a whole process where you're sitting down at the table and you're having several planning meetings and then deciding what the best course of action is for both sides, be it on the profit side and how it's going to actually economically benefit that community, and just empowering each community. That's the thing that's supposed to happen, and people just are not aware. And I leave it also, I place the onus also on government officials, because they're not letting their constituents know. They're in your face when they need votes, but at the time when they're supposed to teach you how to actually exercise your rights, because there's several rights. Voting is not the only right you have. You're supposed to actually come out and exercise the right to engage in these debates and demand environmental impact reports and so forth. And you see it so much with these renewable energy projects. You know, there's so much case law that can show you, you know, in like I think Cape Cod, they were trying to build out wind veils in the ocean, and it was a bit like that community. It's a wealthy, it's an affluent, you know, mostly white community, so they knew their rights. That didn't happen. That absolutely did not happen, because they knew that they could bring them in court, and it got resolved through like dispute resolution. So I think the more we empower each other and the more we actually ask and demand for our elected officials to let people know, the same way you can let me know that I need to vote for you is the same way you can let me know that this is something that's on the table and there's a council meeting that needs to happen, and so that your voice can be heard, is how I feel it should be happening.
Nykeeba, you're absolutely right. I think, you know, Connie mentioned corporate greed. Michelle's talking about grassroots campaigns, and then you're bringing up, just like as well as like Gerie with holding our government accountable. And I think that's one of the frustrating for me personally, I'll speak for me personally, is the democracy and part of energy democracy, right? And how our government continues to fail us in respect of informing us of what we should be informed about, right? It's like we shouldn't have to take time to follow up and find out that these things are happening in our community, right? We shouldn't have to beg them to listen to us. It should be a conversation, a constant conversation, like you said, not just when it's time for election. I want to bring Kelly into the conversation because she mentioned she's working with the MCM Accountability Task Force, and I want her just to kind of, you know, explain what that is and how that's a tool that could be used for working towards energy democracy.
Yeah, I love what you said, Nykeeba and Gerie. I absolutely am hopeful about the movement for climate equity and justice in this country. There is such a rich history from people around the country, communities around the country, of stopping pollution, stopping bad projects, and building really inspiring solutions. One of the projects that I've been lucky to be involved in is developing a national shared accountability framework for communities to use when they're pushing for clean energy and climate solutions. And here in Miami-Dade County, we are starting that process by reaching out to communities that are most impacted by the effects of climate change and impacted by pollution, impacted by energy poverty, and engaging them in developing a new task force to hold the county government and eventually the utilities and others accountable to what they say they want to do, which is to move towards climate solutions, move towards equity. And so really it's just community by community. We have to take the power back. And that's what the beauty of the energy democracy framework is it shows you how to take your democracy back. The other thing I want to encourage people to do is really, as you are fighting for an individual solution, think about the history, like Michelle was saying and others were saying, and also think about the root causes of the problem you're looking to solve. If you're not asking the question of who is most impacted and where are those impacts the most while you're trying to solve something, you're potentially exacerbating harm. And so we have a shared accountability framework I can share in the chat for you to read. It was developed by environmental justice leaders, energy experts, government folks, people around the country this last year to help you to build accountability as you work for climate justice.
Thank you, Kelly, and definitely look out for that link in the chat. I wanted to also bring up other examples of energy democracy work. I'm going to start with Nykeeba in terms of like, what are other examples? I'm curious if you had mentioned Jamaica and Nigeria, if there's any types of ED work being done there.
So the unfortunate thing is, no, it's not. There is no move towards a decentralization. There's hardly any move towards renewable energy. So let's go to Nigeria. You have literally, again, Africa's biggest economy. You have tons of literal billionaires off of the back of the oil and gas industry. And so it's basically, they're looking at it like you're trying to take my candy, right? So any talk or any move towards even renewable energy, we haven't even started talking about equity. But any talk or looking at it through the lens of like renewable energy and climate change, there's a block. Which also, like, it makes me scared now with my big idea of wanting to implement waste to energy in an equitable way. It scares me because it's just like when people's money is threatened, you never know like what means and how far they'll go to stop just the mere idea. Then you have a country like Jamaica where, again, corruption has a lot to do with it. I always look at Jamaica as a mini Nigeria because, again, if you look it up, Nigeria is like literally top 10 most corrupt countries on earth. And so Jamaica, we're small, so we slide under the radar, but it's just as bad here. It's just that we only have 3 million people, right? So I would say a bit more complacent. Every time I go to the beach, I'm like, this is why we let things slide. It's so beautiful here. Like, you go to the beach and you just leave it alone. So there's never going to be this push with this attitude of complacency. And again, just this lack of knowledge. We don't have a government structure or system here that empowers people. We have a government, this is literally true. We have a government that will literally oppress you for the 4 to 5 years in between elections. And when election time comes around, they'll literally fix a road and they will go and hand out maybe some money in communities that they need support in, or they'll go and hand out some food, and then they're basically buying votes. And so with that kind of structure, my challenge has been, because it has to be community oriented, it has to be community based, how do I implant or supplant this idea into people's minds like, hey, we actually have rights here. Hey, we can actually demand that there is community engagement. We can actually have these. And of course, the legal system isn't as robust as the United States. So any case law I'll cite to will be US law, because essentially you're not going to really find case law down here where there's that much of impactful movement. Where I can say that I commend environmentalists in extreme cases, in very extreme cases, environmentalists will sign petitions and basically stop the government from performing certain things. So they wanted to mine one of our mountain ranges. Or for instance, they wanted to turn one of our protected land areas for industrial use. So things like that are particularly egregious, you'll see movement there. There'll be community action. But unfortunately, there's a mindset of the energy system is how it is. We don't have light sometimes. I literally have my first day back in Jamaica to speak on a panel, the light just like cut. And ask me when it was coming back, I don't know. And again, it's bad here, but in a country like Nigeria where your economy is oil, that's insane. That makes absolutely no sense. But there's just this idea of there's nothing I can do. And so I'm happy to hear you guys, everyone's opinions on ideas on how that can change and how that mindset can change. Because it's very, very difficult in the global south and in countries with less infrastructure. And studies have shown this. I've read papers that have said this. When you talk about energy democracy and countries that are just now getting up to where developed countries are in terms of energy use and electrification, it's a bit more difficult. The infrastructure is not there. The mentality is not there.
This is Jerry. I want to kind of piggyback on something that Nykeeba said. What we experienced here, and I'm going to be diplomatic, I hope, as I say this. When you were talking about the politicians passing out food or building a road to say, hey, I need your votes. What we experienced here was outside influential entities trying to separate our neighborhood. Some people were offered money, some play, or oh, we'll do this thing or that thing, trying to kind of pit neighbor against neighbor or area against area. And that's one of the issues that we ran into. However, we felt that we had such a good group of people and a strong whole representation of our neighborhood that they were not significantly influenced by those types of things. However, there were people on the periphery of our neighborhood that were chiming in, that don't even live in the area, but you're chiming in and writing letters in support of this or that, and trying to basically negate what our experience is and what our future experiences will be, as though we were not well versed enough to research for ourselves and understand. That was one of the things I think used to be one of the issues for Michelle. It's like these companies are coming, literally telling us that we're misinformed and we do not understand the benefits of, and that's further trying to disenfranchise our neighborhoods and further trying to marginalize, our community, because you know nothing about our community. You don't know who lives here and what their understanding is, but you want to generalize the population and clump everybody together in one collective group, as though we didn't understand what the benefits of solar are. We understand the benefits of solar. That was never the issue. Never the issue. The issue is the path to get there. The path that you're taking to get there. Thank you.
And I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'd love to just quickly respond to that. One of my focuses has been climate communication. So when I think about the climate crisis, and someone has once said, when an issue is too big to understand or conceptualize, human beings tend to overlook it, which is the reason why there's a meme of like a dog, a cartoon dog sitting in fire saying, this is fine. And that's generally the Earth's response to climate change, because it seems like something that is too big to do or accomplish. And so that's why I'm so passionate about climate communication. And I think it would work so well in that situation, because Jerry, people, if there was proper and streamlined communication initially, then there's no way anybody can come in and infiltrate and misinform. And that's one of the challenges I experience now in the global south, where there's not any streamlined communication to say, listen, this is the issue, this is how we propose to fix it, these are the adverse effects, and these are the positives, and these are the outcomes, this is how we want to achieve it. And so without that streamlined communication, that's when there's the area for big greedy corporations to come in and penetrate and have that divide, the disenfranchisement, what is wrong with me? The disenfranchisement occurs.
Yeah.
I wanted
This
to
is
ask
Michelle. I want to chime
Okay.
in. Oh,
And
no,
Michelle,
go
you could
ahead.
answer. You could answer it too. I wanted to ask, what was your strategy when you started getting the pushback from those companies? Because I'm sure there's people who are watching here who may think, okay, if I got involved in my community, if there's something that I'm passionate about, and then outside forces started to come in, like, would I be able to build a strong enough coalition that we could stand together? Because there, like you said, like when it's a grassroots campaign and there's strength in numbers, but you have to have that trust. So I would love to hear from Connie, Jerry, Michelle, how did you guys form that trust so that it was impenetrable?
I think, and I'll let Connie and Jerry chime in, but I think for us, the trust was already there. We were a neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, when we say we've been we're descendants of slaves still in the area 5, 6 generations later. So we grew up with our neighbors. They know, our grandparents knew each other, our parents know each other, our siblings know each other. So for us, we already had that built-in trust. And so it helped us stay together. Also, what's not mentioned, and we're still experiencing it, and we actually just read an article today that rural communities like us, we're still getting outside forces. We are getting circulars to sell our home. We're getting robocalls to sell our land, unsolicited. So there's still that ongoing barrage of outside forces trying to, in my opinion, choose the direction and path for our neighborhood without including us in the conversation and asking what it is we want for our neighborhood. So thank you. Gerie and Connie, did y'all have any more to add?
Yes, hi, this is Gerie. I agree with Michelle 100% that our neighborhood trusted us, and we have the support of the elderly people in our neighborhood. They're the stronghold. They knew that this wasn't a fight that they could handle, and they trusted us enough to be their voice. One of the things that kept us cohesive is we spoke with one voice. We did not speak outside of our organization, or we referred everyone back to center. Everyone, when a question came up or somebody was offered, I don't know, 40 gallons of peanuts or whatever they were offering, the community kind of brought it back to center because we know each other. And so the word got around. Well, so-and-so has been calling me. We use social media. We were texting each other. Hey, I saw a sign that was on my house that said so-and-so. Did you get that? No, I didn't. And then we started researching that. But I think that our collective, we spoke as one voice. We participated and engaged each other. We had weekly meetings. We looked at the issues step by step. We also tapped into our resources. We have people who knew how to break that comp plan down and rip it to shreds to our advantage. We had people that have been working in this community to combat environmental issues since the 70s. They were at the table, a part of our council. We had folks that were good at research, and we had folks that were good at organizing and keeping. So we tapped into the talents in our neighborhood, and we used those just like someone would operate a small business. And that's how we think we were able to be successful in accomplishing what we did. And we learned, we researched and we learned things as we went along, but we did our own research. We did not wait for someone to tell us, oh, this is what this means, or this is what this impact may look like. We decided that we had to be our own advocate for ourselves.
And let me add to that, Gerie. When we first, Michelle, Gerie and I first communicated with each other and with one of our commissioners, he told us, it cannot be, your argument cannot be based on feelings, nor the concept of not in my backyard. So what we did, we pulled together as a group, and like Gerie said, we did our research. Now it was a lot of work. I think it's so much work in the sense that some communities may not want to do it. We did the research and we delegated the duties. For example, someone did water research, how it would affect our aquifer. Someone did research on heat island effect, how it would affect the temperature in our neighborhood. So we broke it down into what we thought was important specifically for our neighborhood, and did research. When we went to the meeting, we didn't give our opinion of how we felt. We gave advice.
I want to add one more thing to Connie's statement. And when we engaged our local government and commissions, we had a presentation. We did not go there saying, as Connie said, oh, I don't want it and this is why. We did professional presentations. We put all of our information, the people that are making decisions are the people that like to have paper. They still like to see things in writing. So we provided them with that. We provided them with statistics and data, whether it be how our ancestors came to this neighborhood, to, as Connie was saying, what this would look like if because we all have well water here. So if our well water was affected, I mean, if these panels leached or whatever, how would this affect our well water? So we did our research, as she stated, but we also went to county government, not like a ragtag group of people being upset, which is okay too, don't get me wrong. However, because of the pandemic, we couldn't march down to City Hall with our flags up and our signs and we wanted to though. However, we didn't. We wanted to, but we found a way to make our voices be heard by presenting everything professionally, as opposed to just saying we were just a ragtag group of people coming. And as Connie stated, he told us straight up, you all need to provide evidence to provide to me to show me why this should not be done. That's what he told us. And this NIMBY that won't work. And from there, we had our marching orders and we were successful.
I think to answer your question, we had a common goal. A lot of us in our neighborhood, we were relatives, we were neighbors, we were friends, and we had a common goal. And so I think in our community, in our neighborhood, that really helped.
Yeah, I think your story is definitely a case study for folks who want to rally behind a cause in their communities. And I just want to comment on the emotions and how they said to just kind of check that out the door. And I really want to just call BS on that, because I think that it's unacceptable for our government officials to expect us to be emotionless when the policies and decisions that they make affect us on a physical, spiritual, emotional level. So of course we're going to react appropriately. There shouldn't be this respectability politics that comes into play where you have to present something a certain way. I just have to put that out there, because that really bothered me, because they have you thinking that you should present yourself a certain way in order for you to be respected and to be heard. Meanwhile, they're just allowing these destructive policies to continue. So I think that with energy democracy, a lot of the things that you all mentioned in terms of like researching and using the talent pool that you have in your community, delegating work, building up that trust, all of that is under this energy democracy umbrella, right? It's like, these are the ways that we're going to be able to work towards energy democracy. So I wanted to pull in Kelly really quick, just to see if she had anything to add of what you've heard so far.
I think I can't say it better than all of you did about really how to make things happen in your community when there's a really clear motivation, there's a clear issue. If anyone listening or watching is not sure where to start, you don't have an immediate issue you want to work on or create, I definitely would recommend a couple of things. One, and if you're a kind of person who wants to read something or watch a video, within the shared accountability framework that I gave you in the chat, at the end of the shared accountability guide is a list of resources on all sorts of different ways, like a library of resources of how to organize your community, how to understand different energy issues, case studies of communities that have tried to build accountability and equity towards clean energy. And so take a look at that. The other resource I want to highlight is there's this national network called the Energy Democracy Project that I'll share in the chat as well. That is a number of organizations around the country, a lot of environmental justice groups, a lot of local, like people of color led solar organizations, organizations for the green economy that have come together around this banner of energy democracy and tried to share resources. And so you can check that out and find videos and resources of how to get started in your community.
I would
Thank you,
just like to
Kelly.
also add that we also wanted to come with a solution too. And Kelly, I really do appreciate the resource that you shared, and we'll definitely look into that because we did find it helpful to also say, this is the state of where we are on how communities are not really involved in the process on what's happening. But this is where we want to go. And so knowing that you have tools that you can share when you go talk to different government officials or organizations or even legislators, it helps. And so for us, one of the ones that we use was the Energy Justice Scorecard. And we liked that because it was about the Initiative for Energy Justice. We liked it because it was a one-pager and it had 5 quick questions, but it addressed so much of what we shared here. So it addressed the process. Are frontline communities engaged in this process? And this could apply to whether you're considering a project or policy, restoration, what has happened historically, like we talked about today, and what can we do to correct that? Decision making, kind of like we said, again, who's involved in this project? The benefits, that was another issue that we've seen in our local county, that there are projects that are the infrastructure has been placed in neighborhoods, but they're not benefiting from it. So therefore, are we making decisions, policy or projects that are not benefiting the local neighborhoods where infrastructure is placed? How can we correct that? And then access. If we're saying a just transition, if we're saying we want renewables for all, then are decisions we making helping to increase access to folks, or is it helping to perpetuate the inequities to access to renewables? And so I love that you have your accountability framework that you're sharing. I would say for beginners, I'm not sure how long that is. If you want to look for a one-pager, the Energy Justice Scorecard, I think it's also a good place, just so that communities can have a goalpost of what would we like our world to look like. And so I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. We do have another question in the chat box. Let me see if I can bring it up. So the question is, there is an information vacuum regarding many community-based issues and a lack of scientific experts willing to help. How did you get experts willing to contribute? Is there a resource?
Hello, this is Gerie, and I'm going to defer to Michelle because Michelle was our researcher, and we're talking hundreds of emails. When we were even looking for legal counsel, we went through, I don't know how many attorneys that would give us an hour consultation. So we used that to our advantage. Everyone that we talked to, we learned a little bit more legally as to how we could address something. And we took that and we snowballed it into the next thing. But Connie is on the NAACP Environmental Climate Committee, Justice Committee, and use that as an opportunity to find out what was happening on the national level. So we could just email people, hey, this is an issue that we're having here. Would you provide a few minutes to speak with us regarding so-and-so? We got a lot of no's, but we got a lot of yeses. And that's how we were able to run into several people in the fields that were on the forefront of climate change and climate justice and environmental racism and environmental justice that were very beneficial to us. Michelle, would you want to add something?
Yeah, I think the fact that we wanted to absorb as much information as we could. And so if there's any communities out there, we signed up. If it was a webinar and it said environmental justice, climate change, we tried to attend. We wanted to educate ourselves. We wanted to learn what the issues were, what work had already been done, what solutions were being recommended and suggested. And through that process, each of us, Connie, myself, and Gerie, we learned some of the, I would say, leaders in the areas. And so because of visiting webinars and conferences and reading, we asked for insight. We shared our story, we shared, are there any resources like Kelly just provided? Are there any tools that you can offer? Any time that you would mind giving to us to talk on our issue? And because of those, I would say networking, but also we really just wanted to learn. Listening sessions, I would say. We were able to form some relationships with individuals and also other organizations that were that either were in the environmental cause or stood with environmental justice. And so I think we mentioned the NAACP, Environmental and Climate Justice Committees, Sierra Clubs, Clean Energy for All was mentioned earlier in the opening. There are many organizations that we're grateful for, and then also that we're also already working in these areas that brought us along. And so I think for anyone who's looking to meet others, I think just talking, getting out of your comfort zone and asking questions is a way to meet others and ask, and don't be ashamed to just ask for help. We're learning, we're still learning. I still ask for help. Gerie, Connie, and I, we still ask for help, and we've received no sometimes, but don't stop at no. I think even actors say that, they heard a lot of no's before they got the big role. But if you believe in your cause and believe in your community like we do, I think you won't be hampered by the no's that you will receive.
Thank you, Michelle. And I will just mention Miami Climate Alliance is also a resource. Central Florida Climate Action, who is also co-hosting this summit. So if you guys are interested in learning more about climate justice and getting more involved, I will drop the links to both of our websites in the chat. But I wanted to go to Nykeeba about the law aspect of it, because there's a lot of attorneys who are politicians, right? And they go in and they know the law, and we don't have that luxury, right? Like the citizens don't have that luxury. So where can we get more information if we really don't have connections? Like, I think one of the great things with Michelle, Connie, and Gerie is that you already had this pool of talent, and you had these connections, and you knew who to kind of like ask, and you guys all work together. What do you do if you don't have access to people like that?
I mean, I would just look at, and so in many of these organizations that are geared towards environmental justice, there are attorneys present. So what I would start to do is to reach out to those organizations and just, I'm looking for an attorney, I'm looking for legal advice, because you're absolutely right. If you're not careful, you might end up going to an attorney who is completely adverse, like seeking adverse outcome than you. So for instance, the NAACP, like there's a group of lawyers that works with the NAACP that works on environmental issues. Again, like the Sierra Club is a group of lawyers. There are countless environmental law institutions that seek to redress situations like this. So I would pretty much like start there, and it's as simple as a Google search, like what environmental organizations are there, and reaching out to say, hey, like what attorneys do you guys have at your disposal, and kind of snowballing from there, if that makes sense.
Earth Justice is another organization of lawyers that advocate for their environment. So.
Kelly, did you have any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, one thing I agree with those suggestions. The other thing I would say is nobody should be intimidated about policy and think you need to have a law degree or have to have a lawyer in order to try to influence policy that affects your community. A lot of policy gets created by people who have no background in law. I think the important thing is to connect with people who have relationships in the government in your community or have experience with trying to influence ordinances and policies, whatever it is you're trying to build. But then yes, if you get down the road and you have a vision for what you want to create in terms of a policy, and you need a lawyer, those are great suggestions.
Thank you. So I want to be mindful of time. We do have to leave a little time so we can do our final wrap up for the summit. But are there any last thoughts? This has been a really great conversation. I have tons of notes here. You guys really have me thinking about a lot of things in terms of organizing and just connecting with community. And I'm just going to open the floor for whoever would like to say any last thoughts.
I would just like to say, this is Michelle. And thank you for thinking we knew where to go and who to ask, but I just want to make it clear we did not. What you see today is after many, many questions. I can only speak for myself. I felt very lost at the beginning of this journey. Lost for the fact that I knew that our home was something special and that it seemed like outside of our community, that value wasn't appreciated. And so what you hear today is only after coming together with my neighbors and our families and our community, believing in ourselves, asking questions, researching, and then even after hearing no, still saying no, we disagree, and here's why, and we matter. Black neighborhoods matter. So if anybody can be encouraged by our story, please know that I feel like we started, at least I did. I started from the beginning, and now this is just on the job training to show the love of the neighborhood where I grew up and my relatives and several generations are from. So thank you for this opportunity, everyone, and hopefully we were able to impart a little knowledge on our experience. So thank you so much.
Hello, this is Gerie. Yes, I'm glad Michelle clarified that. My background has nothing, absolutely nothing, career-wise to do with environmental anything. But we trusted each other so, and there were times that we didn't know which door to go into, which way to turn, but our core group kept supporting each other when, especially, I'm speaking for myself, that it was so much work and it was like a full-time job. Every day there was something that we either needed to research, follow up on, and some days were better than others. We had these baby successes and major successes and failures, but information is power. And if you inform yourself and you inform your neighborhood and you just believe in the process of you and your neighborhood and your voice, and know that you, just like Michelle said, you may get a lot of no's, but when you get that one big yes, that's what counts. And I don't think, we never thought we would get this far. From the beginning, we never thought that they would mention Archer, Florida on the Senate floor in Tallahassee. Never thought that. But here we are, and no matter what the outcome was, we knew that we did all we could to fight for what we felt was right for us and our neighbors and our community. And I think that that's something that will resonate with our communities for generations to come, that we actually stood up for what was right as opposed to what was being proposed. We stood up for what was right, and we were heard.
I would just like to add, I think our neighborhood focused on three things. What was most important to us? We focused on our history of our neighborhood, our historical Black history of our neighborhood. We focused on the generational wealth and the mental state of our descendants, our children, great-grandchildren. And we also focus on environmental justice. We truly believe it was an issue of equity and justice. And those were the areas that we reached out to get experts on. So you have to look at your environment, your community, because every community is different, and work from there.
Nykeeba, Kelly, would you like to say anything really quick?
Sure, I'll just say I'm really honored to be part of this. You know, I have an 8-year-old son named Wyatt, and my son knows that climate change and social justice and racism are connected. And he knows this because we've been to the incinerator near our community, because we've been to protests for racial justice. We've been to protests on climate change. We've talked to people about these issues. You know, if anyone is still concerned that environmentalism and democracy and social justice, racial justice are not connected, just look at the young people in this country and around the world. It's changing. And I want to really encourage people to focus on who and where the issue you care about is most impacting, and really stand in solidarity with those people, listen, and figure out who is making these decisions, because we can change that. It doesn't have to be the way it is right now. We can change the language, we can change the culture of our energy systems in any system we live within.
Absolutely. And my final thought is, firstly, thank you so much for this opportunity. In particular, Michelle, Connie, and Gerie, it's honestly an honor to sit here with you. You are a group of people who you literally walked across the street and saw something, and you've made such an impactful change. And I say that to say it's such a keen reminder that, again, you don't have to be an attorney. I remember sitting in a professor's class in law school in 2L saying, you know, we're learning about this energy law, but what can little me do? And she basically she completely just like disregarded that comment and said, no, there's no little you, like this is the first start. And you are able to make this impact. So do not be intimidated by big corporations and their power and their money. Do not be intimidated by government officials and 500-page ordinances and laws and stuff. Like, don't be intimidated. There's help out there. And I think you three women are a beautiful testament to the fact that you just have to really bury your head into it, and really fight for your own democracy, fight for a stake. You are the biggest stakeholder in any energy system. You are the one that has to turn your light on. If you're up north, you're the one that has to have your house weatherized and paying exorbitant bills if it's not. You're the one being affected. So do not be in any way dismayed by how big the system can seem, and just take it step by step with the resources that have been provided today.
Mic drop. I have nothing else to add. Thank you so much, Kelly. Kelly, Michelle, Nykeeba, Connie, and Gerie. This has been an incredible panel. I've learned so much from you. I've been inspired by you all. And I hope that everyone who's watching has been inspired as well. So I'm going to end this portion right now, and I will invite Jacques on so we can just wrap up the summit. If you guys want to turn off your cameras, feel free. Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have reached the end of the summit. 4 days, great conversations. We hope you guys have learned a lot. All of these recordings will be up on the MCA YouTube channel. So if you missed anything, if you want to go back to anything, they will be there for you. Let me see, where is Jacques? While we're waiting on him, I just wanted to again mention the Miami Climate Alliance. We are a network of individuals and organizations that are working on people-centered solutions for our climate crisis. And if you want to learn more, I dropped in the link on how to become a member. All that's required is you just read our principles and priorities. And if you agree, you sign up and you're a member of the MCA. We do our work primarily through working groups on various topics. We have climate and health, clean energy, disaster resilience. So if you want to get more involved in the climate justice fight, we are here. I'm not sure if Jacques is going to be able to join us, but maybe Jillian can come on really quick, just talk to us about Central Florida Climate Action. All is out.
Hi, yes, of course. I'm trying to pull up a similar link right now to share with you all for Central Florida Climate Action. It's not coming up when I type it in. Hold on.
It's all good.
There we go. Yeah, we are a climate focused group made up of about like 20 local different organizations and representatives. And we really want to tackle the climate crisis by uniting the voices of like organized labor and worker organizations, different community groups, different faith-based groups, and all other frontline communities so that we can be unified in building out the climate movement in Central Florida, and have that be rooted in justice, and so that it's led by those who are the most impacted. And in the chat, I will now just drop in, this is the link to our website, and at the very top, just click stay connected and I'll scroll you down to the bottom of the page. You just put in some simple information, and then you will be able to know more about us and keep up to date with all the different programs that we do, just like the summit and other things of that nature. And I want to thank all the people that have helped with the planning for the summit. It's been a long process. Me and Jeanette and Nadia Ahmed and Jacques Worley and Elizabeth Mathis and Carlos Torabella. I really don't think I'm forgetting anybody, but yes, and I'm so happy that everyone was here and could be with us during these 4 evenings, and especially this Friday night. So I will pass it back to Jeanette if she has anything else to add.
No, I think we're all good. I will give people back their Friday night. Thank you so much for attending, guys, and we'll be in touch. Have a good weekend.